Basically, everybody nowadays is complaining that they are struggling financially. In fact, about 50% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and almost 60% of Americans say they are struggling to afford basic necessities. And the numbers are basically the same in Canada. But what is actually causing people's financial difficulty? Today, we're going to be looking at 4 different aspects of finance: the overall economy, the individual financial situation, corporate greed, and individual financial choices to determine what the actual cause of financial struggles are in 2025. Now, let's first talk about the overall state of the economy to see if there's anything that stands out. This is the part of the video that I have the least amount of confidence in, since understanding the state of the overall economy is something that takes a lot of experience and training, and there's a lot of debate even on what these individual numbers mean. They are, however, worth looking at because sometimes these overall trends can give us an idea of the overall health of the economy. If the overall health of the economy has gone down, then that can be an indication that everything else is also down, since it is sort of a trickle-down effect. However, just because these numbers are solid doesn't necessarily give us an accurate picture of what life is like for the individuals, since corporations at the top can become wealthy selling to other countries, while domestically most citizens have a hard time paying for goods and services. Another thing that adds additional confusion to looking at numbers of the overall economy is that every government is very motivated to make the economy appear as strong as possible, since it's a good reflection of how likely they are to get reelected in the future. So we're just going to look at these in a quick glance and try to see if there's anything that stands out. And to be honest, there isn't really much. If we look at some of these stats, like looking at unemployment, we see that unemployment at the moment is actually quite low. It's only at about 4.3%, which is actually pretty good over the time period of this particular graph. Further looking at things like the overall GDP, we see that it's mostly trending upward. There isn't any kind of dip. During 2021, we saw a very sharp dip for obvious reasons, and right after the 2008 financial crisis, we kind of get this very gradual sort of dip before it kind of recovers. Whatever is going on is not going to be clearly found in the numbers. Now that we've determined looking at the overall economy isn't necessarily the best measure for determining how the average person is doing, let's try to look at some stats and figure out what it's like more from an individual standpoint. Now, before we get into this, it's really important that we understand a specific concept and that I lay something out explicitly. Inflation is the process of things going up over time in cost. Now, it isn't exactly quite as straightforward as things just going up in cost, because as things go up in cost, usually wages go up to compensate, but nonetheless, the cost of goods goes up. However, because of the way the measure of inflation works, when we correct something for inflation, such as average income, it also automatically accounts for the increased cost of goods. This means that if in 1950 people were making an inflation-adjusted amount of $50,000 a year, and today at the same value of currency, they're making $70,000 a year, that means that people nowadays are about $20,000 on average more wealthy than people in the 1950s, because the cost of things being higher now is already figured for in that number. I always, for some reason, thought that this was an independent variable, like you had inflation and then you had the cost of goods, but no, they are very tightly connected. Now, there's some really interesting conclusions I want to draw here in just a minute, but let's just run through some of these numbers. And this first one is pretty interesting. If we look at the real median household income over time, this is an adjusted for inflation number that tries to take into account the rising cost of goods, and you can see that the average income has actually gone up over time. However, it still seems hard to afford things. So what exactly is going on here? Now, there are also stats that show that income has not kept up with inflation, and so I'm not exactly sure what to exactly interpret. The best guess I can come to is that it is probably about the same as it's been, maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower. Overall, I don't think that the economy is in a great place right now, but I don't think it fully explains what is going on. Now, an obvious place to look is to see if the cost of goods have gone up over time. Where this gets particularly interesting is that the cost of living hasn't actually increased for every single metric. Now, looking at this ranker listing, which I've done my best to fact check, and it seems to be roughly accurate, although I'm not sure anyone is playing these numbers and they are from 2020. We can see that the cost of things from the past adjusted for inflation isn't necessarily always higher. And even when we pull from the CNN numbers, we can see that even in the last few years, costs have gone up in some particular items, but they aren't at historic highs. And it's not exactly clear what's going on. Now, obviously, there can be regional differences and averages are a little bit weird, but where this really starts to make sense is where we look at the specific areas where costs have gone up. For an example, back in 1973, the average home sales price was $33,100. But when we adjust that for inflation, we see that the average home price in today's money was about $37,000. And if we look at the bottom, you can see that the average home price in 2023 is $426,000. This means that houses not only have gotten more expensive because of the general increase cost of things through the process of inflation, but that they are exponentially more expensive, counting for the increased costs of good over time. Now, I feel like it's still important to mention that the average house size has gone up over time. And let's not forget that houses used to look like this, and now a lot of the houses I've been in and worked on as a construction worker look like this. So part of the price going up is a consequence of changing house styles. If we look at the increased cost of rent, you can see adjusted for inflation, it has definitely gone up, but not nearly by as much of a margin. Tuition costs is another area where the average cost has gone up over time. And this is the one that really shocked me. The average price for a gallon of gas is actually cheaper nowadays than it used to be. This means that when your grandparents brag to you about how they used to pay a nickel to fill up fuel, well, you can remind them that you're actually paying less fuel now than they used to. And this is true for many objects. For an example, the cost of computers has gone down substantially. Back in the day, you could expect to pay $2,000 to $3,000 for a pretty crappy computer, and now you can get a very high quality computer for a few $100s only. I don't have to do the inflation calculation to show you that spending $3,000 back then is not equivalent to spending $3,000 now, or in most cases, much less than that. One last area I want to talk about when it comes to individual consumer finances is debt. And debt has gone up substantially over time. A large amount of the overall increase in debt, as you can see, is due to housing, but there's other non-housing debt that people have taken out. And one of the worst offenders of this are things like Klarna. Editing nut here. Yeah, Klarna is not the worst offender. As you can see, it's probably student loan debt or auto debt. You can see here that all of these things have really gone up. I think Klarna is actually categorized in the other category, since Klarna is considered something separate from credit card debt, and that's why it sort of operates under different rules. It's, from what I can tell, more like a payday loan than anything else. But yeah, I just threw this chart up here so you can get some more detail here. Now, one thing I want to say is these numbers are not everything, and I do believe that overall the economy is in a downturn right now, and it is hard for people to afford basic necessities. I am in no way trying to imply that things are easy or the problem doesn't exist. I'm just trying to say that I don't think the problems are as extreme as people think they are, and a lot of them come down to personal decisions and not so much because the overall economy is that terrible. Sure, it is horrible that the average cost of living and just paying for a house is way higher than it used to be. If you're now spending 50 to 60% of your income on just housing, then those small increases in other things can make a really big difference. More what I'm trying to demonstrate with this is when we correct for housing and education, overall things haven't gotten all that much worse, but that doesn't necessarily minimize the impact of these particular things. So now let's talk about everybody's favorite punching bag.
Where's my money?
Now, I really wanted to have a section in this video where we talk about corporate greed, but part of the problem was that when I looked into it, I had a hard time finding numbers that would really show it concretely one way or the other. And the more I dug into it, the more I found that it's actually very hard to determine this, and the people that say they can and have numbers, well, it's controversial to say the least. There is some indication that the average profit margin a company makes has gone up over time, but this could just as well be attributed to more efficient manufacturing techniques that lower the costs, but they keep the price the same, and other things. Now, I don't entirely buy this. I do think that companies charge more money for things. I am personally not at all a big fan of companies that put profit over everything else, just like everybody else. However, I do want to defend them a little bit. First of all, when companies charge more money, but people still buy the more expensive product, people are essentially telling the company that they can get away with charging more money. If everybody complains about the price of things, but they continue to buy it at that price, then why shouldn't the company charge more money? Every time Netflix or Disney Plus raises their prices, there's always articles online about people complaining, yet I don't see people watching less Disney Plus or Netflix. The point I'm making is we do vote with our wallets a lot more than people give them credit for, and so if you're tired of companies being greedy and charging more money than you think something's worth, the best thing you can do is to stop buying the product and find alternatives. This tells the market that they are asking too much money. But when people complain about the cost of things and yet continue to give those companies money, then in what universe is the company incentivized to not charge that much? And I think this is part of the problem when it comes to discussing corporate greed, is people complain about the rising prices of things and how companies continue to charge more for things they used to offer for cheaper, but they're still willing to go out and pay that amount of money for the thing. If a large amount of people stopped buying it at a certain price point, that would indicate to the company that they are charging too much money for their object. But if every year companies charge 10 to 20% more for things, and yet people continue to pay that amount of money, then, well, how are they charging too much? From the company's perspective, they are only charging too much when people stop buying them. This isn't to excuse corporate greed, and there certainly is a huge problem with companies prioritizing finances over everything, but in a way, it is partly our fault that we continue to buy things at an overpriced amount of money, especially when these things are not necessities. Sure, it's probably unfair that somebody is doing that, but in a way, if you go out and buy it, you are supporting that industry. You are supporting the business of scalping. Another thing that I think is often not counted when it comes to corporate greed is that what is provided now in terms of service is often very different than it used to be, and in many cases there isn't an exact apples to apples comparison. Sure, the average vehicle is more expensive nowadays than it used to be, but it also comes with a lot of features that they didn't used to have. And it's all well and good to say, well, I wish they made a simpler car and I could, buy that simpler car at a lower price. The reality is that those features do sell cars to a lot of people, and the people who don't really want them are eventually going to be forced into buying them, whereas the people that really want those extra features are going to gravitate to the companies that make them, and it's going to lose sales for the makers of the simple cars. There are also increased pressures on companies for all kinds of reasons. Since we've been on the topic of the auto industry, there are constantly new regulations and standards that are required for the manufacturers of vehicles. This is costs that they have to pay to certify safety or add extra features to the car that they pass off to the consumer. And this is one of the big problems with environmental taxes, is that people think because the companies in the middle or the manufacturing process are being taxed, it isn't going to come back around to them. But all that the manufacturers do is pass that cost off onto the customers. Now, whether or not you think that we should have environmental taxes is not the topic of this video, but remember that any kind of regulation that gets pushed onto a manufacturer or a provider of a service, that is all of the costs incurred by that process are eventually going to be passed on to you, whether or not you like it. Let's talk a bit about personal responsibility in finance. Recently, I've been really obsessed with shows like Caleb Hammer's Financial Audit. This show basically takes people and goes through their personal finances. They put out about 3 episodes every single week, and they're not the only ones that look at people's financial decisions. And guess what? There are a lot of people out there making very bad financial decisions, overspending on things they don't need.
How much you spent total in the boo-boos?
$700.
$700?
Spending money when they're already struggling to afford their basic necessities.
So I bought him 2 really nice Lego sets.
You spent $9,500 when you brought in 2.
putting things on credit card and paying extra money because they don't understand how interest works, and just general financial illiteracy. And people now are consumers. They exist to buy things. Remember the Stanley Cup craze? I think this is the epitome of consumer culture and overconsumption. People paid a substantial amount of money to have a little water bottle, which is fine, I think. I think if you want a nice water bottle, that's okay. But then it wasn't enough to have one water bottle. They needed 2 or 5, or in some cases, I've seen people have like 30 of them. And then they have special editions that are even more money. I thought the point of having a water bottle was like you buy it once and then you just have it for a long time because, well, it's a water bottle. How is it going to go bad? I still have my $20 Columbia water bottle that I bought like 5-10 years ago. Sure, it's not fancy, but it gets the job done. But the thing is, people are not buying these items for the functionality of it. They are buying it for the status. They are buying it for the trend. And when you have people engaging in this behavior, it incentivizes companies to charge more money for things because people aren't buying it because they need it. They are buying it because they want it. And then you have this going even farther with these stupid people accessorizing them and selling them all this extra garbage that they don't need on top of that. I see countless companies that capitalize on people's impulsive purchases and their consumer mindset. People try to find meaning in the things they get and try to show people that they're successful and have things through the stuff they have while attaining no status and not actually gaining meaning in their life either. This is a massive problem that people are constantly putting wants above needs. And when you see people constantly making bad financial decisions, then it's kind of hard to blame them or even take them seriously when they say the economy overall is doing bad, since I consistently, not only on these shows, but in real life, see people making poor financial decisions. There are so many cases where I see people overspending on things or buying things that they don't need and really can't afford, and then I'm supposed to feel bad for them when they're complaining that things are too expensive. One episode that really sticks out to me in Caleb Hammer's financial audit is this episode where he has these 2 women on that constantly go to Disneyland.
Oh, $3,000 in Disney on this month, and then $1,000 in the other card, $4,000 in Disney in one month, and you're going 2 times next month, and 1 March, and then 1 million more times next year, 2 times in the last couple months.
They literally went into debt because they go to Disneyland multiple times a year. And sure, you can complain that Disney is greedy for charging so much money, but when you have suckers like this paying that amount of money to get something out of it, then why should they charge less? Clearly their business model is working for them. And a huge part of the problem too is a complete lack of responsibility that people are taking for their own personal finances. I think the reason we hear so much about the economy and corporate greed is because people are incapable of admitting that they have made poor choices and that they don't actually understand how to manage their money. I want to roll a quick clip from a recent episode I saw that pretty much perfectly sums up the exact problem with this.
I would say all of this is not my fault. It's American consumerism.
Of which you participated in willingly? No? Did you not?
Once you start to understand how to manage your money and you kind of get some mental clarity and you start being less defined by the physical possessions you have and you realize they don't necessarily bring you happiness, instantly your finances become better because you're not constantly trying to prove something by getting more things. People make a lot of stupid financial decisions. And so when you're doing all these things wrong, especially when the economy could be shaky or not very good, it's kind of hard to tell based on the numbers. Why would you make things substantially worse for yourself? The point is that people are being irresponsible and the economy isn't doing the best. So when you combine those 2 factors, you are setting up a recipe for disaster, and this feeds back into this horrible loop. The last financial crisis in 2008 was primarily caused by a bunch of people borrowing money for things that they couldn't really afford, and then when hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people started defaulting on their loans, it caused a huge crash that had ripples across the economy. Likewise, did you know that spending actually increases in recessions? That's right, people spend more money on trying to make themselves feel good when things are going bad, which makes the problem worse. I don't want to talk about this topic too much at length since I think it's pretty much as simple as people make poor financial decisions and need to take personal accountability. But there's one last topic that I kind of stumbled upon in my research that I thought was very interesting when it comes to understanding this topic. And that topic is relative privation. Basically, more things exist now than used to exist, meaning it is harder to own a lot of stuff because you're always owning a smaller and smaller chunk of the available things. This means that even if you have a lot of stuff, because there's so much more stuff you don't have, you feel poor. Another way this comes up is just with internet exposure. Nowadays, we see people that have all these things that we don't have, and so we feel poor or like we don't have a lot because we don't have what everybody else has. But in reality, if you didn't see those things, you would never know you wanted those things to begin with. Basically, the simplest way to explain this is that wealth is somewhat determined by the amount of stuff that you have. If you live in some kind of caveman tribe and there's only like 40 tools you guys have come up with, well, then you can have all 40 of the tools. If like the things that people own are maybe like a bow and a nice knife and a hatchet and some clothes, well, then you can have all those things and now you're rich. But nowadays, because there are an infinite number of things essentially, you can never even come close to owning 1% of all the things. And this makes us feel very poor. There's some really interesting ideas when it comes into this that I really want to do more research on and talk about maybe in a part 2 of this video, but I did just want to mention it here in the end. So in conclusion, I think the best takeaway of this is that the overall economy seems to be okay on paper, but it seems to be very hard for a lot of people, and there are some indications that maybe the cost of living is going up, which is a big problem. But people also make a lot of bad choices that contribute to their bad financial situation, and then they want to blame the economy for their bad decisions when it's their bad decisions that probably contribute more greatly to their financial situation than anything else. I definitely don't have it all figured out when it comes to finances, but going into debt for things you can't afford and that bring very little lasting value to your life has bound to make you miserable because you don't have the lasting happiness from the things, but now you also have long-term unhappiness because debt is a hole that it's very hard to get out of because you don't have money, and so you need to borrow money, and now you have even less money because you're even further in the hole, and so you need to borrow more money, and it's this really negative loop that's very hard to get out of. Not only that, a lot of people don't understand basic concepts like how interest works and what compounding interest is, and how credit card interest is essentially the fee for impatience. Delaying gratification, taking accountability for your actions is probably the best way to insulate yourself in this world. Sure, you're not going to have as much stuff as your neighbor, but you're not going to have to worry about losing it because everything you own is actually yours and not owned by the credit card company. Once people start taking accountability for their own actions, they're going to be far more insulated from the greater economy and its ups and downs. I'm not trying to say it is easy to make it out there. There's all kinds of problems in the job market and things are very unstable and uncertain out there. But when we make poor financial decisions, we are making sure that everything is going to be worse for us overall. Overall, I think the conclusion of this is that a lot of the numbers seem to indicate that the economy is okay to slightly bad, but a lot of problems are coming from individual consumer debt. Maybe we'll talk about this more in the future, but I really just wanted to kind of make a video talking about this because I get so annoyed when people complain about the economy and it's their own bad individual choices. I'm Adventure Nut. You've watched me on the Yellow Couch, and I hope to see you guys very soon for the next video. Take care, guys.